Hi, fifth grade readers. We are on chapter 11. We just ended chapter 10 in preparing Harry and the Weasleys for going to Hogwarts. Everything's settling down, but nothing has been solved. And we are going to find out what happens next. Chapter 11, Aboard the Hogwarts Express. There was a definite end of holidays gloom in the air when Harry awoke next morning. Heavy rain was still splattering against the window as he got dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt. They would change into their school robes on the Hogwarts Express. He, Ron, Fred, and George just reached the first floor landing on their way down to breakfast when Mrs. Weasley appeared at the foot of the stairs looking harassed. "Arthur," she called up the staircase. "Arthur, urgent message from the Ministry." Harry flattened himself against the wall as Mr. Weasley came clattering past with his robes on back to front, and hurtled out of sight. When Harry and the others encountered the kitchen, they saw Mrs. Weasley rummaging anxiously in the dresser drawers. "I've got a quill in here somewhere," and Mr. Weasley bending over the fire talking to. Harry shut his eyes hard and opened them again to make sure they were working properly. Emma Diggory's head was sitting in the middle of the flames like a large bearded egg. It was talking very fast, completely unperturbed by the sparks flying around it and the flames licking his ears. Muggle neighbors heard bangs and shouting, so they went and they called. "What do you call those men? Arthur, you've got to get over here." "Here?" said Mrs. Weasley breathlessly, pushing a piece of parchment, a bottle of ink, and crumpled quill into Mr. Weasley's hands. "It's a real stroke of luck. I heard about it," said Mr. Diggory. "I had to come into the office early to send a couple of owls, and I found the improper use of magic lot sending this off. It's Rita Skeeter, and if she gets a hold of this one, Arthur—" "What does Mad Eye say happened?" asked Mr. Weasley, unscrewing the ink bottle, loading up his quill, and preparing to take notes. Mr. Diggory's head rolled its eyes. "Says he heard an intruder in his yard. Says they were creeping towards the house, but they were ambushed by his dustbins. Made one heck of a noise, too, and they fired rubbish everywhere, as far as I can tell," said Mr. Diggory. "Apparently one of them was still rocketing up on the ground when the policemen turned up." Mr. Weasley groaned. "And what about the intruder?" "Arthur, you know Mad Eye," said Mr. Diggory's head, rolling its eyes again. "Someone creeping into his yard at the dead of night? More likely it was a very shell-shocked cat wandering around somewhere, covered in potato peelings. But if the improper use of magic lot get their hands on Mad Eye Moody, he's had it. Think of his record. We've got to get him off on a minor charge, something in your department. What are exploding dustbins worth?" "Might be a caution," said Mr. Weasley, still writing very fast, his brow furrowed. "Mad Eye didn't use his wand, did he? He actually didn't attack anyone." "I'll bet he leapt out of bed and started jinxing everything he could reach through the window," said Mr. Diggory. "But they'll have a job proving it. There aren't any casualties." "All right, I'm off," said Mr. Weasley, and he stuffed the parchment with his notes onto his pocket and dashed out of the kitchen. Mr. Diggory's head looked around at Mrs. Weasley. "Sorry about this, Molly," it said more calmly, "bothering you so early and everything. But Arthur's the only one who can get Mad Eye off, and Mad Eye's supposed to be starting his new job today. Why had he chose last night?" "Never mind, Amos," said Mrs. Weasley. "Sure you won't have a bit of toast or anything before you go?" "Oh, go on then," said Mr. Diggory. Mrs. Weasley took a piece of buttered toast from the stack of the kitchen table and put it into the fire tongs and transferred it to Mr. Diggory's mouth. "Franks," said the muffled voice, and then with a small pop vanished. Harry could hear Mr. Weasley calling hurried goodbyes to Bill, Charlie, Percy, and the girls. Within 5 minutes he was back in the kitchen, his robes on the right way now, dragging a comb through his hair. "I'd better hurry." "You have a good turn, boys," said Mr. Weasley to Harry. Ron and the twins, dragging a cloak over his shoulders and preparing to disapparate. "Molly, are you going to be all right taking the kids to King's Cross?" "Course I will," she said. "You look after Mad Eye. We'll be fine." And Mr. Weasley vanished. Bill and Charlie entered the kitchen. "Did someone say Mad Eye?" Bill asked. "What's he been up to now?" "He says someone tried to break into his house last night," said Mrs. Weasley. "Mad Eye Moody?" said George thoughtfully, spreading marmalade on his toast. "Isn't he that nutter?" "Your father thinks very highly of Mad-Eye Moody," said Mrs. Weasley sternly. "Yeah, well, Dad collects plugs, doesn't he?" said Fred quietly, as Mrs. Weasley left the room. "Birds of a feather." "Moody was a great wizard in his time," said Bill. "He's an old friend of Dumbledore's, isn't he?" said Charlie. "Dumbledore's not what you would call normal, though, is he?" said Fred. "I mean, I know he's a genius and everything." "Who is Mad-Eye?" "He's retired. Used to work at the ministry," said Charlie. "I met him once when Dad took me into work with him. He was an Auror, one of the best. A dark wizard catcher," he added, seeing Harry's blank look. "Half the cells in Azkaban are full because of him. He's made himself loads of enemies. The families of the people caught, mainly. And I heard he's been getting really paranoid in his old age. Don't trust anyone anymore. Sees dark wizards everywhere." Bill and Charlie started to come and see everyone off at King's Cross Station, but Percy, apologizing most profusely, and that he said that he really needed to go to work. "I just can't justify taking off more time at the moment," he told them. "Mr. Crouch is really starting to rely on me." "Yeah, you know what, Percy?" said George seriously. "I reckon he'll know your name soon." Mrs. Weasley braved the telephone in the village post office to order 3 ordinary Muggle taxis to take them into London. "Arthur tried to borrow ministry cars for us," Miss Weasley whispered to Harry as they stood in the rain-washed yard, watching the taxi drivers heaving 6 heavy Hogwarts trunks in their cars. "But there weren't any to spare." "Oh dear, they don't look happy, do they?" Harry didn't like to tell Mrs. Weasley that Muggle taxi drivers rarely ever transported excited owls, and Pidgewiggin was making ear-splitting racket. Nor did it help that a number of the Dr. Filibuster's fabulous Wet Start no-heat fireworks went off unexpectedly in Fred's trunk and sprang open, excuse me, causing the driver to yell with fright and pain as Crookshanks clawed his way up the man's leg. The journey was very uncomfortable, owing to the fact that they were jammed in the back of the taxis with their trunks. Crookshanks took quite a while to recover from the fireworks, and by the time they entered London, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were all severely scratched. They were relieved to get out at King's Cross Station, even though the rain was coming down harder than ever, and they got soaked carrying their trunks across the busy road and into the station. Harry was used to getting onto the platform 9 3/4 by now. It was a simple matter of walking straight through the apparently solid barrier dividing platforms 9 and 10. The only tricky part was doing this in an unobtrusive way so as to avoid attracting any Muggle's attention. They did it in groups today. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the most conspicuous as they were accompanied by Pigwidgeon and Crookshanks, went first. They leant casually against the barrier, chatting unconcernedly, and slid their way through it. But as they did so, platform 9 3/4 materialized in front of them. The Hogwarts Express, a gleaming scarlet steam engine, was already there, clouds of steam billowing from it, through which many of the Hogwarts students and parents on the platform appeared to be dark ghosts. Pigwidgeon became noisier than ever in response to the hooting of many owls through the midst. Harry, Ron, and Hermione set off to find seats, and were soon stowing their luggage in a compartment halfway along the train. Then they hopped back down on the platform to say goodbye to Mrs. Weasley, Bill, and Charlie. "I might be seeing you all sooner than I think," said Charlie, grinning, as he hugged Ginny goodbye. "Why?" said Fred keenly. "Oh, you'll see," said Charlie. "Just don't tell Percy I mentioned it. It's classified information, until such a time as the ministry sees fit to release it, after all." "Yeah, I sort of wish I was back at Hogwarts this year," said Bill, hands in his pockets, looking most wistfully at the rain. "Why?" said George impatiently. "You're going to have an interesting year," said Bill, his eyes twinkling. "It might even get time to come off and watch a bit of it." "A bit of what?" said Ron. But at the moment, the whistle blew, and Mrs. Weasley chivied them towards the train doors. "Thanks for letting us stay, Mrs. Weasley," said Hermione, as they climbed aboard, closed the door, and leant out the window to talk to her. "Yeah, thanks for everything, Mrs. Weasley," said Harry. "Oh, it was my pleasure, dears," said Mrs. Weasley. "I'd invite you for Christmas as well, but I expect you're going to want to stay at Hogwarts. Well, with one thing and another." "Mom," said Ron irritably, "what do you 3 know that we don't?" Well, you'll find out this evening, I expect, said Mrs. Weasley, smiling. It's going to be very exciting, mind you. I'm very glad they've changed the rules. What rules? Harry, Ron, Fred, and George said together. I'm sure Professor Dumbledore will let you know. Now behave, won't you? Won't you, Fred? Won't you, George? The pistons hissed loudly, and the train began to move. Tell us what's happening at Hogwarts, Fred bellowed out the window at Mrs. Weasley. Bill and Charlie sped away from them. What rules are they changing? But Mrs. Weasley only smiled and waved. Before the train had rounded the corner, she, Bill, Charlie had disapparated. Harry, Ron, and Hermione went back to their compartment. The thick rain was splattering on the windows, and it made it difficult to see out of them. Ron undid his trunk, pulled out his maroon dress robes, and flung them over Pidgewiggins' cage to muffle his hooting. Bagman wanted to tell us what's happening at Hogwarts, he said grumpily, sitting down next to Harry. At the World Cup, remember? But my mother won't stay. Say, I wonder what. Shh, Hermione whispered suddenly, pressing her fingers to her lips and pointing towards the compartment next to theirs. Harry and Ron listened and heard the familiar drawling voice drifting through an open door. Father actually considered sending me to Durmstrang rather than Hogwarts, you know. He knows the headmaster, you see. Well, you know his opinion of Dumbledore. The man's such a mudblood lover, and Durmstrang doesn't admit that sort of riffraff. But Mother didn't like the idea of me going to a school so far away. Father says Durmstrang takes a far more sensible line than Hogwarts about the dark arts. Durmstrang students actually learn them, not just the defense rubbish we do. Hermione got up and tiptoed to the compartment door and slid it shut, blocking out Malfoy's voice. Does he think Durmstrang would have suited him, does she? She said angrily. I wish he had gone. Then we wouldn't have to be putting up with him. Durmstrang's another wizarding school? Said Harry. Yes, said Hermione sniffily, and it's got a horrible reputation. According to an appraisal of magical education in Europe, it puts a lot of emphasis on the dark arts. I think I've heard of it, said Ron vaguely. Where is it? What country? Well, nobody knows, do they? Why not? Says Harry. There's traditionally been a lot of rivalry between the magical schools. Durmstrang and Beauxbatons like to conceal their whereabouts so no one can steal their secrets, said Hermione matter-of-factly. Come off it, said Ron, starting to laugh. Durmstrang's got to be about the same size as Hogwarts. How are you going to hide a dirty great castle? But Hogwarts is hidden, said Hermione in surprise. Everyone knows that. Well, everyone who's read Hogwarts a history anyway. So just you then? Go on. How do you hide a place like Hogwarts? It's bewitched, said Hermione. If a muggle looks at it, all they see is a moldering ruin with a sign over the entrance saying, Danger, do not enter, unsafe. So Durmstrang will look just like another ruin to an outsider too? Maybe, said Hermione, shrugging. Or it might have muggle-repelling charms on it, like the World Cup Stadium. And to keep foreign wizards from finding out, they've made it unplottable. Come again? Well, you can enchant a building, so it's impossible to plot on a map, can't you? If you say so. But I think Durmstrang must be somewhere farther in the north, said Hermione thoughtfully. Somewhere very cold, because they've got fur capes as part of their uniforms. Ah, think of the possibilities, said Ron dreamily. It would have been so easy to push Malfoy off a glacier and make it look like an accident. Shame his mother likes him so much. The rain became heavier and heavier as the train moved further north. The sky was so dark and the windows so steamy that the lanterns were lit by midday. The lunch trolley came rattling around the corridor, and Harry bought a large stack of cauldron cakes for them to share. Several of their friends looked in on them as the afternoon progressed, including Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, and Neville Longbottom, a round-faced, extremely forgetful boy who had been brought up by his formidable witch of a grandmother. Seamus was still wearing his Ireland rosette. Some of its magic seemed to be wearing off now. It was still squeaking, Troy, Mullet, Moran, but in a very feeble and exhausted sort of way. After half an hour or so, Hermione, growing tired of the endless Quidditch talk, buried herself once more into the Standard Book of Spells, grade 4, and started trying to learn the summoning charm. Neville listened jealously to the others' conversation as they relived the cup match. Gran didn't want to go, he said miserably. Wouldn't buy tickets. It sounded amazing, though. It was, Ron said. Look at this, Neville. He rummaged up in his trunk in the luggage rack and pulled out a miniature figurine of Victor Crumb. Oh, wow, said Neville enviously, as Ron tipped Crumb onto his pudgy hand. We saw him right up close as well, said Ron. We were in the top box. For the first and last time in your life, Weasley. Draco had appeared in the doorway. Behind him stood Crabbe and Goyle, his enormous thuggish cronies, both of whom appeared to have grown at least a foot during the summer. Evidently, they had overheard the conversation through the compartment door, which Dean and Seamus had left ajar. Don't remember asking you to join us, Malfoy, said Harry coolly. Weasley, what is that? Pointing at Pidgewiggins' cage. A sleeve of Ron's dress robes was dangling from it, swaying with the motion of the train, the moldy lace cuff very obvious. Ron made to stuff the robes out of sight, but Malfoy was too quick for him. He seized the sleeve and pulled. Look at this, said Malfoy in ecstasy, holding up Ron's robes and showing Crabbe and Goyle. Weasley, you weren't thinking of wearing these, were you? I mean, they were very fashionable in about 1890. Eat dung, Malfoy, said Ron, the same color of the dress robes as he snatched them back out of Malfoy's grip. Malfoy howled with derisive laughter. Crabbe and Goyle guffawed stupidly. So, gonna enter, Weasley? Gonna try and bring a bit of glory to your family name? There's money involved as well, you know. You'll be able to afford some decent robes if you won. What are you talking about? Snapped Ron. Are you gonna enter? I suppose you will, Potter. You never miss a chance to show off, do you? Either explain what you're going on about or get away, Malfoy, Hermione said testily over the top of the Standard Book of Spells, grade 4. A gleeful smile spread across Malfoy's pale face. Don't tell me you don't know, he said delightedly. You've got a father and a brother at the Ministry, and you don't know? My God, my father told me about it ages ago. Heard it from Cornelius Fudge. But then, father's always associated with the top people at the Ministry. Maybe your father's too junior to know about it. Weasley, yes, they probably don't talk about important stuff in front of him. Laughing once more, Malfoy beckoned to Crabbe and Goyle, and the three of them disappeared. Ron got to his feet and slammed the sliding compartment door so hard behind him that the glass shattered. Ron, said Hermione reproachfully, and she pulled out her wand. Reparo! And the glass shards flew back into a single pane and back into the door. Well, making it looks like he knows everything and we don't, Ron snarled. Father's always associated with the top people at the Ministry. Dad could have gotten a promotion any time. He just likes it where he is. Of course he does, said Hermione quietly. Don't let Malfoy get to you. Ron. Him? Get to me? As if, said Ron, picking up one of the remaining cauldron cakes and squashing it to a pulp. Ron's bad mood continued for the rest of the journey. He didn't talk much as they changed into their school robes and was still glowering when the Hogwarts Express slowed down at last, and finally stopped in the pitch darkness of Hogsmeade Station. As the train doors opened, there was a rumble of thunder overhead. Hermione bundled Crookshanks up in her cloak, and Ron left his dress robes over Pidgewiggin as they left the train, heads bent and eyes narrowed against the downpour. The rain was now coming down so thick and fast, it was as though buckets of ice-cold water were being emptied repeatedly over their heads. Hi, Hagrid! Harry yelled, seeing a gigantic silhouette at the far end of the platform. All right, Harry! Hagrid bellowed back. See you at the feast if we don't drown. First years traditionally reached Hogwarts Castle by sailing across the lake with Hagrid. Oh, I wouldn't fancy crossing the lake in this weather, said Hermione fervently, shivering as they inched along the dark platform with the rest of the crowd. 100 horseless carriages stood waiting for them outside the station. Harry, Ron, and Neville climbed gratefully into one of them. The door shut with a snap, and a few moments later, with a great lurch, the long procession of carriages was rumbling and splashing its way on the track towards Hogwarts Castle. Okay, guys, it looks like they made it to Hogwarts. I want you guys to make your prediction. What is Malfoy talking about? Like some competition? What's he talking about? Durmstrang, Beauxbaton? I don't know. I want you guys to make your predictions below, and we'll find out what happens tomorrow. See you later.